We went up that mountain to kill a devil. We went up there with military-grade thermal optics, high-caliber rifles, and enough C4 to collapse a cave system. We were convinced that the thing living on Blackwood Ridge was a monster. The locals called it the Butcher. They said it snatched hikers off the trails and dragged them into the darkness, never to be seen again. They said that what it did to the human bodies it collected was unspeakable. Well, they were right about one thing. We found the bodies, we found the cave, and we found the creature standing over them covered in blood. But the unspeakable part? It wasn't what the beast was doing to those people. It was what we did to him. My name is Boon. I'm recording this confession because I can't sleep anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I see that creature's face. I see the bullet hole I put in his shoulder. And I see the way he looked at me, not with the eyes of a predator, but with the eyes of a doctor whose patient had just been shot by a madman. Let's go back to the beginning, before the regret, before the blood. My name is Sergeant Boon. I spent 20 years in Special Forces, specializing in long-range reconnaissance and target interdiction. When I retired, I didn't take up golf. I took up tracking. People hired me when the police gave up. I was the guy you called when you wanted to find something that didn't want to be found. 6 months ago, a kid named Rico showed up at my cabin door. He was a mess, young, ex-infantry, eyes red from crying. He told me his younger brother, Mike, had gone climbing in the no-go zone of the Cascades and vanished. The park rangers said it was an avalanche or a bear attack. They closed the case after 3 days. But Rico knew better. He had found Mike's GPS tracker. It wasn't at the bottom of a cliff, it was moving. It had moved 5 miles up the mountain into the jagged peaks where no human could survive the cold. And then it stopped dead in a cave system marked on the maps as unstable terrain. Rico showed me the data. He was taken, Boon, he said, slamming his fist on my table. Something grabbed him and dragged him up there. I need you to help me kill it. I looked at the map. I knew the stories. The Butcher of Blackwood. For decades, people had gone missing in that sector. Sometimes hikers would report seeing a massive, hairy figure carrying a limp body over its shoulder like a sack of potatoes. The assumption was always the same. It was taking them to a larder, to a feeding ground. I agreed to take the job. Not for the money, but because I missed the hunt. And because I hated monsters. We treated it like a black ops mission. We packed 300 Win Mag rifles, night vision goggles, and bear traps modified with high tensile steel chains. We weren't going on a rescue mission. We were going on an assassination run. We were going to hike into the death zone, find the Butcher's lair, and put a bullet in its brain before it could finish eating Rico's brother. We moved out at dawn. The air was crisp, the sky was blue, and we felt righteous. We felt like heroes. We had no idea that we were the villains of this story. The no-go zone of Blackwood Ridge earned its name honestly. It's a jagged scar of granite and ancient timber that rises 4,000 feet above the tree line. The terrain is a nightmare of loose scree, vertical drops, and dense, choking underbrush that feels like it's fighting you for every inch of ground. It's the kind of place where radios die and compasses spin uselessly. We hit the trailhead at 0600. We moved in a standard 2-man recon formation. I took point scanning the sight lines with my Steiner binoculars. Rico watched our 6, his finger hovering over the trigger guard of his AR-10. He was vibrating with a mix of caffeine and grief. I could hear his breathing, short, shallow, angry. He wasn't thinking like a soldier. He was thinking like a brother. That made him dangerous. Stay sharp, Rico, I whispered, not looking back. Emotion gets you killed. Keep your head on a swivel. I just want to find him, Boon, he muttered. I just want to bring him home. We hiked for 4 hours before we found the first sign. It was a climbing boot. A bright orange La Sportiva, high-end technical gear. It was wedged between 2 boulders near a dried-up creek bed. I signaled for a halt. Rico rushed forward, his face draining of color. It's Mike's, he choked out, picking up the boot. He bought these right before the trip. I examined the boot. The laces hadn't been untied. They had been snapped. The leather upper was torn, not cut. Something had applied massive torque to the foot inside to rip this boot off. Look at the ground, I said, pointing to the mud near the creek. The tracks were undeniable. They were 18 inches long, 5 inches wide at the heel, splaying out at the toes. They sank 2 inches deep into soil that barely took the imprint of my own boots. But it wasn't just the size that chilled me. It was the gait. The stride length was over 5 feet. Whatever made these tracks wasn't walking. It was marching. and it was carrying weight. Heavy weight. He was dragging him, Rico said, his voice trembling with rage. He pointed to a smear of dark rust on a jagged rock. Blood, dried, but unmistakable. We followed the trail of blood and drag marks. To our trained eyes, it told a horrific story. We saw broken saplings where the creature had barged through the brush. We saw patches of matted grass where it had stopped to rest. In our minds, we pictured the butcher dragging a struggling, screaming Mike up the mountain, battering him against the rocks. He broke his leg here, I analyzed, looking at a particularly disturbed patch of earth. See the scuff marks? Mike tried to grab this root. The creature pulled him free, probably dislocated the hip or snapped the tibia to stop him from fighting. I was projecting. I was filling in the blanks with my own nightmares. I didn't know then that the creature had stopped there to adjust Mike's position, to carry him more gently because the terrain was getting rough. I saw violence where I should have seen care. By noon, we reached the snow line. The air was thin and cold. The trail led us toward a series of lava tubes, natural caves formed by ancient volcanic activity. This was the butcher's living room. We went prone on a ridge overlooking a snowy plateau. I set up my spotting scope. Movement, I hissed. 11 o'clock, by the mouth of the big cave. Rico scrambled up beside me, raising his rifle scope. There he was. The legends didn't do him justice. He was massive. A towering wall of muscle covered in thick, matted fur that ranged from dark brown to silver at the shoulders. He was standing on a ledge outside the cave, sniffing the wind. He was scarred. Half of his left ear was missing, and a long, hairless line of scar tissue ran down his chest. He looked like an old prizefighter who had gone 12 rounds with God and won. But it was what he was doing that made Rico gasp. The creature was holding something, a limp form, wrapped in a bright blue climbing jacket. He was cradling it in his arms. He walked to the edge of the cave, looked around paranoidly, and then disappeared into the darkness with the body. That's him, Rico snarled, tears freezing on his cheeks. That's Mike. He's taking him into the larder. We don't know if he's dead, I said, though I didn't believe it. The body was limp. He's storing him, Rico shouted, forgetting noise discipline. Like the stories say, he keeps them in there. We have to go in. Now. I grabbed Rico's shoulder, pulling him down before he could expose our position. We don't go in blind, kid. That's a kill box. If we go into that cave on his terms, we die. We need to draw him out. How? I looked at the terrain. A narrow goat path led up to the cave entrance. It was a choke point. We set a trap, I said cold. We use bait. We make him come to us, and when he steps into the kill zone, we drop him. We hurt him bad enough that he can't fight, but we keep him alive long enough to tell us where the bodies are. Rico looked at me. The grief in his eyes had hardened into something brittle and sharp. I want to pull the trigger, Boon. I want to put him down. You'll get your chance, I promised. Let's get to work. We spent the next hour rigging the ambush. We were efficient. We were deadly. We were preparing to murder the only thing on that mountain that had shown an ounce of humanity. Stop. Freeze this moment in your mind. I want you to put yourself in Rico's boots right now. You are tired, freezing, and grieving. You just saw a 9-foot monster carry your brother's limp body into a dark cave. The police gave up. The rangers went home. You are the only one left. If you had a high-powered rifle in your hand, be honest, when would you pull the trigger, or would you try to communicate? Pause the video and type, shoot or don't shoot, in the comments below. I want to see how many of you would have made the same mistake we did. And if you want to see what we actually found inside that cave, trust me, you are not ready for the truth. Hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss how this ends. All done? All right, let's go back to the ridge. The ambush was a textbook L-shaped setup. I positioned Rico on the high ground, concealed behind a cluster of wind-twisted pines, his AR-10 trained on the cave mouth. I took the low ground near the goat path, hidden in a fissure between two boulders. I was the hammer. Rico was the anvil. We didn't have to wait long. About 20 minutes after he took the body inside, the creature emerged. He didn't come out charging. He didn't come out roaring. He came out carrying a crude wooden bucket, probably a hollowed-out log. He was heading for the glacial meltwater stream about 50 yards down the slope. He's thirsty, I thought. He's vulnerable. I clicked my radio twice. Click, click. The signal for Rico to get ready. Through my scope, I watched the beast. He moved with a strange, weary heaviness. He kept looking back at the cave entrance, scanning the sky, scanning the tree line. At the time, I thought he was guarding his hoard, paranoid about thieves. Now I know he was worried about leaving his patients alone. He reached the stream. He knelt down, dipping the wooden bucket into the icy water. He wasn't drinking it himself. He was filling it carefully, making sure not to spill. "Take the shot, Rico," I whispered into my comms. "Leg shot. Drop him." Crack. The sound of the gunshot slapped against the canyon walls. Rico missed the leg. Adrenaline, or maybe hatred, pulled his aim high. The bullet slammed into the creature's right shoulder. The impact was devastating. The creature spun around, dropping the water bucket. A spray of bright crimson mist painted the snow. He roared, a sound of pure agony that shook the loose gravel off the cliff face. "I hit him!" Rico screamed over the radio. "I got him!" Most animals, when shot, do one of two things. They run away, or they charge the shooter. The butcher did neither. He scrambled to his feet, clutching his shattered shoulder. But instead of running into the thick timber to save himself, he turned and ran back toward the cave. He was putting himself between the gunfire and whatever was inside. "He's retreating to the nest," I yelled. "Don't let him get inside. Use the net." I broke cover. I triggered the trap we had set on the path. A heavy weighted steel net, designed for capturing elk, sprang up from the snow. The creature was fast, but he was hurt. He stumbled right into the kill zone. The net launched, wrapping around his legs and torso. He hit the ground hard, sliding on the ice. I sprinted forward, my sidearm drawn, closing the distance. "Rico, move up, flank him!" The creature was thrashing in the net, roaring and biting at the steel cables. But as I got closer, I saw something that made me hesitate for a split second. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't trying to kill me. He was looking desperately at the spilled water bucket on the ground. He was reaching for it with his good arm, crying out in frustration. Rico didn't see that. Rico saw a monster. He came sliding down the slope, rifle raised. He ran up to the tangled beast and slammed the butt of his rifle into the creature's head. Thud. The creature slumped, dazed. Rico raised the barrel to finish him off. "No!" I tackled Rico, knocking the barrel aside. "We need him alive. He has to show us the bodies. If you kill him now, we spend weeks searching these caves." Rico was hyperventilating, spit flying from his lips. "He killed Mike. Look at him. He's a demon." I looked down at the demon. The creature was panting, blood pouring from his shoulder, matting his silver fur. He looked up at us. His eyes were wide, golden, and filled with a confusing emotion. It wasn't hate. It was panic. He raised a shaking hand, the hand that wasn't tangled in the net, and pointed. Not at us. He pointed at the cave. Then he made a motion with his hand to his mouth. Drinking. He pointed at the spilled water, then at the cave again. "What is he doing?" Rico asked, lowering his rifle slightly. "He's begging," I said, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "He's begging us for water." "For himself?" Rico spat. "Let him die of thirst." "No," I whispered, staring at the cave entrance. "I don't think it's for him." I stood up, holstering my weapon. I grabbed the chains attached to the net. "Get the medical kit, Rico. We're going to patch him up just enough so he can walk. Then we're going inside. You want to help him?" "I want answers," I said, "and I have a feeling we're asking the wrong questions." We dragged the creature, who weighed at least 500 pounds, to the cave entrance. He didn't fight us. Once he realized we were going toward the cave, he actually tried to help, pushing with his legs against the snow, grunting in pain. He wanted us to go inside. That should have been my first warning. Predators don't invite you into their den unless they plan to eat you. But this felt different. It felt like an invitation, or a plea. We reached the mouth of the cave. The smell hit us first. Rico gagged. "Oh God, Boon, is that decomposition?" I sniffed the air. I expected the rot of dead flesh. I expected the metallic tang of old blood. But that's not what I smelled. I smelled pine resin. I smelled crushed sage. I smelled wood smoke. And underneath it all, the faint, sterile scent of ozone. "No," I said, clicking on my tactical flashlight. "It smells like medicine." I stepped into the dark, Rico right behind me. The beam of my light cut through the gloom. "Hello?" I called out. The only answer was the echo of my own voice, and the heavy, wet breathing of the wounded giant behind us. We were about to see the unspeakable, and God help us, We weren't ready. We moved into the dark. I kept my flashlight beam low, sweeping the floor for tripwires or pit traps. Rico was breathing so hard I thought he was going to pass out. He was vibrating with the anticipation of finding a corpse. "Stay close," I whispered. "Check your corners." The cave wasn't a natural hole in the ground. It had been modified. The floor was swept clean of debris. The walls were lined with crude wooden shelves wedged into the rock fissures. I shone my light on the shelves. Rico gasped, raising his rifle. "Look at that," Rico hissed, pointing his trembling barrel at the wall. "Torture tools. Sick freak." I stepped closer to examine them. There were long, straight branches stripped of bark and sanded smooth. There were coils of woven vine, thick as rope. There were sharp stones shaped like blades. "Rico, wait," I said, running my gloved hand over one of the wooden poles. It wasn't a club. It was Y-shaped at the top, padded with soft moss and leather. "This isn't a weapon, it's a crutch." "A crutch?" "And these," I said, picking up a bundle of short, flat sticks. "These are splints, for setting fractures." A cold feeling started to spread in my chest, replacing the adrenaline. I looked back at the creature. We had dragged him inside and chained him to a stalagmite near the entrance. He was slumped there, clutching his bleeding shoulder, watching us with those golden, intelligent eyes. He wasn't growling. He was making a soft, chirping sound, pointing deeper into the cave with his good hand. He wanted us to hurry. "He's playing games," Rico spat, turning away from the creature. "He wants us to find them. He's proud of it." We pushed deeper. The tunnel opened up into a massive central chamber. The temperature spiked. It was warm in here, surprisingly warm. I realized we were near a volcanic vent. Steam curled up from fissures in the floor, heating the air. It wasn't a damp, cold dungeon. It was an incubator. And then, we saw them. In the shadows of the far wall, there was a raised platform made of flat stones, covered in thick layers of elk fur and dried grass. On the platform there were shapes, human shapes. "Mike!" Rico screamed. He broke formation. He dropped his rifle and sprinted across the cavern floor. "Rico, stop! It could be trapped!" I yelled, but he didn't listen. I swept the room with my light, clearing the corners, waiting for an ambush. But there was nothing else in the room. Just the steam, the warmth, and the terrible stillness of the bodies. Rico reached the platform. He fell to his knees beside the first figure. It was Mike. He was wearing his blue climbing jacket, but his pants had been cut away. Rico grabbed Mike's shoulders, shaking him. Mike, wake up, please God, wake up." Mike didn't move. His head lolled back. His eyes were half open, pupils blown wide, staring at nothing. "He's dead," Rico wailed, his voice cracking into a sob that echoed off the stone walls. "He killed him. That monster killed him." Rico stood up, his face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. He grabbed his combat knife from his belt. He turned back toward the entrance, toward the chained creature. "I'm going to gut him. I'm going to peel the skin off him while he's still breathing." I walked over to the platform. I needed to confirm the kill. I needed to see the violence the butcher had inflicted. I looked at Mike. I saw the signs of trauma. His left leg was swollen, purple and black. It was clearly broken in multiple places. A catastrophic compound fracture. But then I looked closer. The leg wasn't mangled. It was straight. Perfectly straight. It was encased in a complex lattice of those wooden splints we saw earlier, bound tight with the woven vines. The knots were intricate, secure, and there was a poultice, a thick green paste smelling of eucalyptus and willow bark, smeared over the skin where the bone had likely broken through. I put my fingers on Mike's neck. Thump, thump, thump. It was slow, very slow, but it was strong. "Rico!" I barked, grabbing his arm as he marched toward the exit. "Stand down, he's alive!" Rico froze. "What?" "He's alive," I repeated, my voice shaking. "He's in a coma. Look at his eyes. Look at his breathing. He's been drugged." I checked the other body on the platform. It was an older man, gray hair, emaciated. He looked like he had been there for weeks. He was also asleep, wrapped in furs, a wooden bowl of water sitting next to his head. "He didn't kill them," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "He's keeping them." "Keeping them for what?" Rico asked, wiping his eyes, confused. "To eat later?" "No," I said, pointing to the splints, the water, the warmth. "Look around you, Rico. This isn't a larder. It's a field hospital. The silence in that cave was heavier than any silence I had ever known. It wasn't the empty silence of a tomb. It was the pressurized silence of a church before a funeral. The air was thick, humid, and smelled intensely of sulfur from the thermal vents mixed with something else, something organic and pungent, like crushed pine needles and wet fur. Rico was standing over the platform, his chest heaving, his rifle barrel wavering as he aimed it at the shadows, waiting for a target that wasn't there. He was hyperventilating, the panic attack taking hold. He killed them, Rico choked out, his voice cracking. Look at them, Boon. They're trophies. He's keeping them like dolls. I stepped up onto the raised stone dais. My boots scraped against the rock, the sound echoing too loudly in the chamber. I needed to be the professional here. I needed to assess the situation, confirm the KIAs, and secure the extraction. I holstered my weapon and pulled out my tactical flashlight, switching it to the low-intensity red lens to preserve what little night vision we had left. I knelt beside Mike. He looked terrible. His skin was pale, waxy, almost translucent in the dim light. His breathing was so shallow I had to take off my glove and press my fingers against his carotid artery to feel the thready, slow pulse. Thump, pause, thump. He was alive, but barely. He was in a deep, chemically induced stupor. He's not dead, Rico, I whispered. He's under, sedated. I moved my light down to Mike's legs. This was the moment that shattered my reality. I expected to see the brutal aftermath of a predator's attack. Bones gnawed for marrow, flesh torn by claws, the chaotic mess of violence. What I saw instead was precision. Mike's left leg was encased in a structure that looked primitive, but was mechanically perfect. It wasn't just a bundle of sticks, it was a traction splint. The creature, the butcher, had used straight, stripped branches of hardwood, positioned on either side of the leg. He had used woven vines braided with a complexity that reminded me of sailor's knots to create tension. The leg wasn't twisted, it was pulled straight, aligning the fractured tibia to prevent the bone shards from severing the femoral artery. Rico, look at this, I said, my voice trembling. Look at the knots, look at the spacing. Rico wiped his eyes with his sleeve, stepping closer, his anger warring with confusion. What? It's just sticks. It's not just sticks, I snapped. It's a reduction. Someone set this bone. And look here. I pointed to the skin around the break. It was covered in a thick green paste that smelled of wintergreen and salicylic acid, willow bark, nature's aspirin. That's a poultice, to bring down the swelling. I stood up and moved to the second body on the platform. The older man. He was emaciated, his beard long and matted, clearly a hiker who had been missing for weeks. I checked him. Same story. He was wrapped in layers of cured elk hide. Not raw, rotting skins, but cured leather, scraped clean of fat to prevent maggots. A wooden bowl filled with clean water sat next to his head. A small pile of berries and nuts was placed within reach of his hand. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. It knocked the wind out of me. We hadn't walked into a slaughterhouse. We hadn't walked into a larder where a monster stored his meat. We had walked into a field hospital. He didn't kidnap them, I whispered, the horror of my own actions rising in my throat like bile. He rescued them. That's impossible, Rico argued, shaking his head violently. He's a monster. We saw him dragging Mike. He dragged him because Mike couldn't walk. I grabbed Rico by the shoulders, shaking him. Think about the terrain, Rico. The no-go zone. If Mike fell up there, nobody comes for him. Not search and rescue, not the choppers, nobody. He would have frozen to death in 6 hours, this creature. He went up there. He picked him up. He brought him to the only place on the mountain with natural heat. He set his leg. He's been keeping him alive. Rico stared at me, his eyes wide, the denial crumbling. But we shot him. The words hung in the air, heavy and accusing. We shot him. Just then, a sound came from the tunnel entrance behind us. A wet, scraping sound. The heavy rattle of metal on stone. We spun around, weapons raised out of instinct, but what emerged from the shadows made me want to drop my gun and vomit. The creature had pulled the steel stake out of the ground. He had dragged himself 50 yards through the tunnel, trailing a thick smear of bright arterial blood from the shoulder wound I had ordered Rico to inflict. He was gasping for air, each breath a wet, bubbling rattle. The net was still tangled around his legs, cutting into his flesh, but he pushed forward. He didn't look at us with rage. He didn't bare his fangs. He barely acknowledged our presence. His focus was entirely on the platform, on his patients. He dragged his massive 600-pound frame across the floor, groaning with every movement. He reached the edge of the stone dais and collapsed to his knees. His silver-streaked fur was matted with sweat and blood. He looked exhausted. He looked like an old man who had carried the weight of the world for too long. He reached into a pouch made of animal skin tied around his waist. His hands, those massive hands capable of snapping pine trees, were shaking. He pulled out a handful of wet, dripping moss. He leaned over Mike. With agonizing tenderness, he squeezed the moss over Mike's cracked lips. Water trickled into the boy's mouth. Mike swallowed reflexively in his sleep. The creature let out a soft, low coo. Whoop, whoop. It was a sound of reassurance, a mother's sound. Then the creature turned his head. He looked at me. I will never forget those eyes as long as I live. They were golden, ancient, and filled with a profound, crushing sadness. There was no hate in them, only confusion. He looked at the smoking rifle in Rico's hand. Then he looked at his own shattered shoulder. Then he pointed to Mike. He made a gesture. He held his hand flat, moving it up and down over Mike's leg. Then he pointed to the pile of herbs in the corner. Then he pointed to us. He wasn't surrendering. He was handing over the shift. He knew he was dying. He knew we had killed him. And his only concern in his final moments, was making sure that we knew how to take care of the boy after he was gone. "Oh God," Rico whispered. The rifle slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the stone floor. Rico fell to his knees, burying his face in his hands. "Oh God, Boon, what did we do? What did we do?" I stood there, frozen. I felt stripped naked. All my training, all my tactical gear, all my self-righteousness, and it was all garbage. I wasn't a hero. I was a murderer. I had come here to kill a beast, and instead, I had shot the only good Samaritan left in this God-forsaken world. The creature slumped forward, his head resting on the edge of the platform near Mike's hand. His breathing was getting shallow. The pool of blood under him was spreading fast. I snapped. The soldier in me finally died, and the medic woke up. "Medical kit," I roared, startling Rico. "Get the trauma bag, now. Boon, we are not letting him die," I yelled, ripping the Velcro off my med pouch. "He saved your brother. Now we save him. Move." I ran to the creature. I didn't care about the teeth or the claws anymore. I slid on my knees through the blood and grabbed his massive shoulder. The wound was bad, through and through. The bullet had missed the artery but shattered the scapula. He was bleeding out, and shock was setting in. "I got you, big guy," I whispered, pressing a hemostatic gauze pad into the gaping hole in his fur. "I got you. Stay with me. Don't you dare quit on me." The creature winced, a low growl rumbling in his chest, but he didn't pull away. He looked at me. He saw the gauze. He saw the urgency in my face. And then, he did something that broke me completely. He reached out his good hand. He didn't strike me. He didn't push me away. He placed his massive, leather palm hand over my small, trembling hand that was pressing on his wound. He squeezed gently. He was comforting me. Here was a being that we had hunted, trapped, and shot, and he was offering forgiveness before the blood had even dried. That was the unspeakable truth of Blackwood Ridge. The monster wasn't the thing living in the cave. The monster was the thing holding the gun. "Rico, pressure dressing," I screamed, tears blinding me. "Hold this. Push down with everything you have." We worked on him for an hour. We used every bandage, every packet of Quick Clot, every ounce of skill we had. We turned that cave from a kill box into an emergency room, and all the while the silent guardian watched us, his breathing slowly stabilizing, his golden eyes judging our souls. We had found the missing hikers, but in the process, we had lost something we could never get back: our innocence. We spent the next 6 hours in that cave. We weren't soldiers anymore. We were guests in a sanctuary we had tried to destroy. The bleeding had stopped. The creature, the monk, was resting against the cavern wall, his massive chest rising and falling in a rhythmic, albeit pained, slumber. We had used our entire supply of antibiotics and painkillers on him. It was a risk. If we got injured on the way down, we'd have nothing. But it was the only way to balance the scales. Mike was stable. The old man, whose name we later learned was Arthur, drifted in and out of consciousness. He mumbled about the angel and the furry man, who brought him berries. We gave him water and told him to rest. "We have to go," I said to Rico, checking my watch. The storm is breaking. If we don't move now, we lose the window. And Mike needs a real surgeon for that leg. Rico looked at the creature. His anger was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow shame. We can't just leave him, Boon. He's hurt. He can't hunt, he'll starve. He won't starve, I said, pointing to the stockpile of dried nuts and smoked fish near the back of the cave. He's prepared. He's smarter than us, Rico. He'll heal. But we have to leave, and we have to make sure nobody ever finds this place. We rigged a litter for Mike using the climbing ropes and the sturdy branches the creature had gathered. It was crude, but it would hold. We decided to carry Mike and guide Arthur. Before we left, I walked over to the monk. He opened his eyes. The gold was duller now, clouded by the morphine I had injected into his shoulder, but he was present. I knelt down. I took off my tactical watch, a heavy, indestructible piece of gear, and placed it on the stone floor next to his hand. A trade. A small, meaningless token for the life of the boy he saved. I'm sorry, I whispered again. You stay here. You heal. We won't let them come back. The creature looked at the watch, then at me. He let out a low, rumbling breath. He closed his eyes and turned his head away. He was dismissing us. He didn't want our pity. He wanted his peace. The descent was hell. We had to carry a 200-pound man down a goat path covered in ice, while guiding a confused, hypothermic geriatric. Every step was a battle against gravity and exhaustion. My back screamed. Rico's hands were bleeding, but we didn't stop. We were fueled by a mission that was no longer about a paycheck. We made it to the tree line by dusk. We found a spot near an old logging road, miles away from the actual location of the cave. This is it, I told Rico, dropping the litter in the snow. This is where we found them. Rico looked at me, confused. But we found them in the cave. I grabbed Rico's vest, pulling him close. Listen to me closely, kid. This is the story. We found them huddled under a rock overhang right here. We found footprints of a bear, but the bear ran off. That's it. But the creature does not exist, I said, my voice hard as granite. If you tell people a giant Sasquatch saved your brother, two things happen. 1, they lock you up in a psych ward. 2, the government sends the extermination team to that cave to capture him, dissect him, and turn him into a science experiment. Do you want that? After what he did for Mike? Rico looked back up the mountain, toward the hidden peaks shrouded in mist. He shook his head slowly. No, I don't. Then we take this secret to the grave. The butcher is a myth. The monk is a ghost. And we are just lucky. I pulled out my satellite phone and dialed 911. Dispatch, this is Boon. I have 2 survivors. Severe hypothermia, compound fractures. We are at grid reference Sierra Tango 4. Send the bird. As we waited for the chop of the rescue helicopter, I looked up at the mountain one last time. I imagined him up there, alone in the warm dark, tending to his wound. I hoped he would forgive us. But I knew that nature doesn't deal in forgiveness. It deals in survival. And thanks to him, we had all survived. Dawn broke with a deceptively clear sky. The storm had passed, leaving the mountain coated in 3 feet of fresh powder. It was beautiful, and it was deadly. The risk of avalanche was extreme. We have to move, I told Rico. If the sun hits that snowpack, the whole face of the mountain is going to slide. We had a logistical nightmare. Mike couldn't walk. The old man, Arthur, could barely stand. We had to carry one and guide the other down 4,000 feet of vertical hell. We rigged a travois, a drag sled, using 2 sturdy saplings and the climbing rope. We lashed Mike to it, wrapping him in the thermal blankets. Ready? I asked Rico. He nodded, looking exhausted. We started to pull. The weight was crushing. Every step in the deep snow burned our quads. We made it maybe 200 yards from the cave entrance before the sled snagged on a buried rock. We pulled, slipped, and fell. It's no good, Boon, Rico gasped. We can't do this. We'll die before we hit the tree line. Then, a shadow fell over us. I looked up. The monk was standing there. He shouldn't have been out of the cave. He was wounded. The cold air must have been agony on his exposed shoulder. He didn't make a sound. He walked past me. He grabbed the front of the travois, the ropes that Rico and I were struggling to hold. He wrapped the ropes around his good shoulder. He looked at us and grunted. Move. He started to pull. What took 2 men to drag inches, he pulled with a steady, relentless stride. He was a snowplow. He broke the trail for us, his massive feet creating post holes that Arthur could step into. He dragged Mike's sled like it was a toy, ignoring his own pain, ignoring the blood that started to seep through the bandage on his shoulder. He escorted us. He was making sure his patients got discharged safely. We walked for 4 hours. He took us down a route I never would have found, a hidden game trail that hugged the ridgeline, safe from avalanches. He knew every rock, every crevice of this mountain. When we reached the timberline, the point where the deep woods began and his domain ended, he stopped. He knew he couldn't go further. Down there was the world of men, the world of guns and cages. He dropped the ropes. He stepped back. He looked at Mike one last time. Then he looked at Rico. Then he looked at me. He raised his hand, palm open, in a silent goodbye. I saluted him. It was the only gesture of respect I knew that carried enough weight. He didn't salute back. He just turned and vanished into the white mist, a ghost returning to his haunted castle. The last mile was just us. Without the monk's strength, it was grueling, but we were fueled by the need to protect him. We reached an old logging road at coordinates Sierra Tango 4. "This is it," I said, dropping the sled. "This is the extraction point." Rico looked at me. "What do we tell them, Boon? What do we tell the press?" I grabbed Rico by the collar of his jacket. "Listen to me closely. We found them huddled under a rock overhang. We found bear tracks, but the bear ran off. We splinted the leg ourselves. We carried them down. But the splint," Rico said, pointing to the complex woodwork on Mike's leg, "that's clearly not our work." I knelt down. With a heavy heart, I cut the beautiful, intricate vine knots the monk had tied. I replaced them with ugly strips of duct tape and paracord from my pack. I made it look messy. I made it look human. "We destroyed the evidence," I whispered. "It's the only way to keep him safe." I pulled out the satellite phone. My hands were shaking. I dialed 911. "Dispatch, this is Boon. I have 2 survivors, severe hypothermia, compound fractures, requesting immediate medevac." 20 minutes later, the thumping of rotors filled the valley. A search and rescue Black Hawk appeared over the trees. As the wind formed, the chopper blasted us. I looked back up at the jagged peaks of Blackwood Ridge. I saw nothing but rock and snow. He was gone. When the paramedics loaded Mike, one of them looked at the splint job. "Ugly work," he shouted over the noise. "But you set the bone perfectly. You probably saved his leg." I just nodded. I took the credit for a miracle I didn't perform. They called us heroes. The local news ran a story. "Veterans rescue missing hikers." They interviewed us. Rico cried on camera, hugging his brother. I stood there stone-faced, lying through my teeth to protect the only decent soul on that mountain. Mike made a full recovery. He walks with a limp now, and he has strange dreams. He remembers a giant in a fur coat giving him water. The doctors say it's a hallucination caused by trauma and hypothermia. We let them believe that. Because the truth is that we invaded a sanctuary. We shot a healer, and he forgave us. That's the secret I carry. That's the unspeakable thing. Not that monsters exist, but that sometimes the monsters are better men than we are. They called us heroes. The governor flew in to shake our hands. The press ran the story for weeks. Rico got his brother back. Mike made a full recovery, though he walks with a limp now. He doesn't remember much about the cave. He thinks he dreamt of a giant in a fur coat giving him water. The doctors told him it was a hallucination caused by hypothermia and trauma. We let them believe that. It's safer that way. As for me, I retired. For good this time. I sold my rifles. I don't hunt anymore. I can't look through a scope without seeing those golden eyes staring back at me. I can't look at a target without remembering how his hand felt when he squeezed mine, comforting me while I packed the wound I gave him. Sometimes late at night when the wind howls down from the north, I wonder about him. I wonder if that shoulder healed properly. I wonder if he's still up there watching the trails, guarding the no-go zone from idiots like us. I hope he is. But I also hope he's learned a lesson. I hope he's learned that humans are the one species he shouldn't save. The title of this video is, "What It Does with Human Bodies is Unspeakable." And I stand by that. It is unspeakable, but not because it's violent, not because it's gore. It is unspeakable because in a world filled with violence, greed, and indifference, the idea that a so-called monster would choose kindness, that a wild beast would choose to heal his enemy instead of killing him, is a truth too pure for our society to handle. We aren't the apex predators we think we are. We're just the ones who lost our way. If you are watching this, and you ever find yourself deep in the Cascades, and you see a shadow moving in the trees, don't raise your gun. Just bow your head and keep walking. You're in his church now. My name is Sergeant Boon. I went up a mountain to kill a monster, and the monster saved my soul.